So I'm Barb Haas-Gibler. As you just said, I'm a behavior specialist, but my training was in education and special ed. I've been in the field as a teacher since about over 40 years. In fact, my first student with Duke 15Q is about 39 years of age himself. So I have the fortune of working at Geisinger. I formerly was with Elwyn with Brenda Finucane, who many of you might know from starting, the original group here. And so I run the Duke Clinic at Geisinger, which is in central Pennsylvania. But as I said, my background is an educator first. So I thought that I should get started with just by briefly explaining what does ABA stand for. And ABA can stand for applied, meaning that the interventions are used with individuals in their natural settings. And the behaviors that we work on are important behaviors for the person, not for the teacher or necessarily, it's really for the person who has some challenging behaviors, how to make their life more appropriate for them and more social in their day-to-day living. Behavioral means the interventions are used that are based on behavioral principles, and analysis means that these decisions are made based on taking some data, an ongoing analysis, and seeing if there's improvement being made. What's really important is because many people associate ABA with autism, and ABA is not just for special ed. It's not just for people with autism. It's not just one program. It's more of a toolbox in which you have various tools. In fact, one of the other speakers was speaking about the JASPER program, which is based on some behavioral principles as well. And ABA is not just for schools or therapy settings. If you think about positive reinforcement, you think about Weight Watchers, you think about bonuses, incentives, programs, smoking cessation, they are based on behavioral principles. What I do know, though, is behavior is not all bad. So as a behavior specialist, of course, if I get called into a school I do school consultations at schools and agencies. So I walk in and the person has, this kid had 400 behaviors this week. Well, behavior's not all bad. What behavior are you talking about? The behaviors here on the left, when we're talking about pointing to objects or pictures, taking an adult's hand to get to something they want, handing a picture to someone, asking for help, following directions, washing your hands, talking, those are behaviors. Those are the behaviors we want to see. That being said, the behaviors on the right are generally the behaviors that a behavior specialist is brought in for, because we have a person that maybe scream or yell, cry, puts objects in mouth, destroys materials, maybe jumps up and down, pushes things away, or runs away. So the behaviors on the left are the behaviors we really want to see, whereas the behaviors on the right are behaviors that are there that we want to work on decreasing. You don't just get rid of behavior. If something's working for someone, you need to find something appropriate that works for that person as well. This one I just love because it says, "You see anything? I wasn't even looking. I thought we were both in timeout." Oftentimes, the children I work with and the adults don't understand. They know. One little boy says to me, he goes, "Miss Barbara, I'll be good." And I'm like, "Well, what does be good mean?" He goes, "I'll behave." It's I'll be good, I'll behave. It's a circle. He wants to be good. He wants to behave. He just doesn't know what's expected of him. So that's one of my favorites right there. Behavior is caused. It's observable. That being said, there are private behaviors, and that's one thing I find that's very important. If we think about even hunger, thirst, anxiety, those are behaviors, they're internal feelings that we have, but how do we know it on the outside? How do we observe those things? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Behavior is communication. So a parent will say to me, "I'm not sure if this program's working," and I'm like, what is your child doing? "Well, he's smiling more, he's reaching more, he's talking more." I said, "Well, it sounds like we might be going on the right path." But it is communication. And behavior serves a function. We do some things to gain something. We need something. We want something. That being said, the function is not the problem. So I'm thirsty right now. If I come and grab your water, that's a problem. I'm hungry. I take your food. That's a problem. But the function of me being thirsty or hungry, there's nothing wrong with that, all right? So that's what I always try to think about. And I feel like sometimes like CSI, like I'm trying to figure out what does the person want? What does the person need? many times when we have children that have more limitations or less verbal or have some physical challenges, the same behavior may serve lots of functions. So we may have pushing away something may mean I don't want that. It could also mean I want to get rid of it off the table. It might mean I might be reaching for something that might mean I want it, or it might be I'm just interested in it, or a sensory interest. These challenging or problem behaviors, though, interfere with learning new skills, and that's where it's important. And also that they can socially isolate the learner. So I work with another group of children that are serious huggers. They love to hug people. Well, a 2-year-old toddler running towards you and hugging you is one thing, but when it's a 6-foot-tall, 200-pound man running to you to hug you, it's a little off-putting. So with those children who we know are, many of them love to hug, and we all love our hugs, right? So, but what we try to teach is handshakes, not hugs, when the children are young. Or there's a circle of people that you hug. That there's their family. Those are the people you give hugs. Then you can learn to do either like a high five or, some of the things that are other socially and cool things that people do to show that they're saying hi and showing some minor affection. As behaviorists, we're often brought in to do functional behavior assessments. Oftentimes, a school may have a school psychologist do this. It's very important, though, to figure out what exactly is this challenging behavior and really describe it appropriately, because what happens is then, so for example, somebody says, well, he's aggressive. Well, what does that aggressive look like? That's a big term, aggressive. Disruptive. I had one of the schools called about I was consulting on a little boy, and they said he was aggressive and he pushed a kid off the playground. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he pushed? This was aggressive. I said, where was he? Well, he was at the slide. I said, oh, and what happened? Well, he wanted to be first, so he pushed the kid off the slide. Well, that's a lot different than a person that runs across the room and it physically aggresses towards somebody. So it's really important to figure it out as a team, to define it very specifically. So if I went to a school where a boy was disrupting materials. He was taking anything that was presented to him, like a school material or puzzles, anything, and he was like flipping them off the table. Well, I was counting how many times he did it, and another young woman in the classroom was assigned to be his data collector. Well, she was not getting near the same count as I was, so obviously we needed to be more clear about what we were talking about. We need to try to figure out, it's like a hypothesis. We think the reason the person is disrupting these materials is because he doesn't want to do them, right? I mean, it would seem like every time you present him with a puzzle, he flips it. It may be that he doesn't want to do it, but that's our hypothesis. We want to think about strategies to prevent or antecedent strategies. What can we do beforehand so that the person will not engage in that behavior? So if I go to a school, and sometimes I'll go to a school and the teacher will say, do you want me to show you him have a tantrum? And I'm like, no, I trust that this child has a tantrum. I believe you. You brought me in here. But tell me 5 things that you would do that he would not be having a tantrum then. Show me 5 things that would prevent him from having a tantrum. That gives me more information to work with because I know things that are motivating, that he likes to do. But we need to, like I said, you don't just get rid of something. If reaching for that bottle is the way I get my drink and it works very quickly, I get that bottle, I have it in my mouth before you can interrupt it, well, then I need to figure out a way to get him that drink when he wants it quicker. How do I teach him to ask for something? Also is what happens after the behavior that won't maintain that inappropriate behavior. So, if you think of the toddler in line at the supermarket saying, I want candy, I want candy, I want candy, and the mom eventually caves and says, okay, here's the candy, but you can't have it till after dinner. Well, that giving in, even at that last minute, reinforced it to happen again. It just made the person going to use it the next time. So, but it's not so clear as that. If it was, then you wouldn't need me or you wouldn't need anyone to help you with behavior. The functional behavior outcomes should be a behavior plan or an intervention or treatment plan. We have to come up with strategies that work for the team. You have to have the resources and you have to have the family on board. Everyone needs to agree this is what we're going to try. We need to first and foremost also identify medical conditions. What are the underlying medical, and then especially I think about many of the girls and guys I've known with the Duke 15, some of it is like some GI issues, there's some constipation, there's motor issues. We have to think about what are these underlying medical conditions. Is the child having seizures? Is the child not having a good sleep at night? We need to understand that. We need to identify positive reinforcers, and they're very, very specific to the person. And we need to think about what in the environment can we change to minimize triggers. So if we know that loud, sudden noises or change of, or movement, I had one classroom that the teachers in it used to hang a lot of things from the ceiling, like their decorations. Well, I had children that got very visually stimulated by it and were very distracted by it. So in that classroom, it wasn't appropriate to have all those decorations. Being away from a heater that cycles on and off. In classrooms, sometimes there's a lot of movement of therapists and TSS, therapeutic staff coming in and out, or speech. By that door is so much going on that classroom seating might be the disruption, being by that classroom door. Then of course we have to identify how we're going to keep some data, how we're going to figure out if this is working. All right, we need to figure this out. If it's not working, we come back to the drawing board. The function of behavior, though, we have to think about, we do things to get things. I want attention. I want objects. I want activities. I want sensory. So if I like to touch, some children like to touch the walls when they're walking down in the hallway. They want to gain that sensory. There are many behaviors that are sensory, that are you can do for yourself, that you gain some sensory input. We also can think about escaping or avoiding things. So you do things to get rid of things. And many times behaviors, a lot of problem behaviors are because I want to get rid of something. I don't like the sound. I don't like the room. I don't like the activity. I don't want to move. I don't like the sensory. So if I'm trying to escape from those things, or I don't like the sensation that I'm having in my stomach, so maybe I'm going to hit, I've had children that hit at their stomachs when they didn't feel well. They were trying to get rid of that uncomfortable feeling of gas, maybe in their belly, all right? So if you're trying to get rid of things, if you're hot, you take off your coat, all right? If you're cold, you might put on a coat. You're trying to get rid of being hot, or you're trying to get rid of being cold. If you're hungry, if you're not hungry, these are all things that can be your functions of your behavior. But escape and getting rid of things. I had one girl that, she thought if she didn't look at me, she could avoid me, and I wouldn't ask her any questions. So she would turn away from me. I'm like, Miss Amanda, do you see me? And she signed no to me. She didn't see me. She didn't hear me, right? She wanted to get rid of me, right? Because she thought I was going to put a demand on her. We think about the ABCs of behavior. So antecedents, what comes first. Behavior is what we see on the outside. And as I said, so for example, I'm from New York originally, so I talk pretty fast. But talking quickly can be very unnerving for some children, and it also could let on that it might sound like I'm anxious. So sometimes it can be anxiety-provoking to hear a person talking too quickly, or the sound of your voice. But the antecedents could be very subtle. The behavior is what happens that we see on the outside, but sometimes the behavior of anxiety is one that we have to figure out, what does it look like on the outside for a child that maybe can't tell you that they feel anxious. I had a young girl that I was observing, and she was in the first grade, and she was very anxious. The teacher in school didn't believe that she was anxious because she seemed so together. But when she got home, she was near tears usually because she held it together for the teacher. But we were in line, and there was a substitute teacher, and the little girl, the substitute came in, and she was really tough. She was like a Marine sergeant. She blew the whistle, and she gave so much directions. My girl looked at me with big, wide saucer eyes, but the typical girl next to me goes, I didn't hear a thing that she said. What did that lady say? Because she was so nervous, and the woman talked too fast. Sometimes it's tone that can be anxiety-provoking for some of our kids. But what does it look like on the outside? So I can look at this young girl and know that when she's biting the side of her cheek, when she starts rocking mildly in her chair, her anxiety level's getting up. I have a young man that I could see that when his ears would get flushed and his face would start getting very red, he was getting anxious. On the consequences, what happens after that behavior? So, did the person, they threw that puzzle, and the teacher said, okay, here, let me give you something else to do. If the child was, give me cookie, and they ended up getting that cookie, did they get it, or did they not? What happens after is what maintains it. The ABCs, like I said, what immediately happened before the behavior, what triggered the behavior, could be a person, a place, activity, a sound, a smell. Sometimes it's the demand. So sometimes a child, when you call their name or ask them to look at you, usually what happens after that is a demand is being placed, right? If I say, Bobby, look at me, I'm usually going to say, now let's do some activity. So sometimes even me calling the child's name could be a trigger for that child because they're afraid what's coming next isn't going to be a treat, it might be a demand. There are slow triggers, and sometimes what I see is in a day, and I think about ourselves as adults, we start fresh potentially in the beginning of the day, and then there's demands being placed as the day goes on. We have different challenges and things. By the end of the day, we're not as readily able to accept a demand, or something happens, or somebody changes plans on us. So it may look like it was a quick trigger, but really there was a slow progression of the day. I've had children that at the school, by the paraprofessional or the classroom aide, actually saw the child from the moment he came off the bus through the whole day. That person really had an understanding of, oh, the bus was late, lunch wasn't what he wanted, he fell on the playground. All these things look like, and then the teacher asked for the puzzle. Well, it really wasn't the puzzle. It was that whole day that child had, it was a delaying of things were happening for him. They also talk about, in behavior, is establishing or motivating operations. So when you're hungry, you're thinking about food. All right, when you're full, food is not as much of a motivator. When you're thirsty, you think of that. When you're in pain, though, and getting rid of discomfort, I think, is a very difficult one. We want the students, and I want students and the children and adults I work with to be able to talk about that they don't feel comfortable, they're anxious, but if they don't have those words and they can't connect that, it's very difficult. I was talking at lunch with a mom, and we were talking about some difficulty with possible GI issues and the discomfort of feeling food going in your stomach. Those little bubbles of air could be, for some children, a discomfort. They're trying to get rid of that. So sometimes the behavior on the outside could be representing that. If you're tired, your behavior, most of us, I don't know how many people are here, are still on different, I'm still on Eastern time. So I've been waking up at 3 o'clock every morning. I'm still and by the time I get adjusted to this, it'll be time to go back to Eastern time again. I'll be ready and I'll be waking up, I'll be sleeping in. But fatigue is very important. And if you are on seizure medication, you are having disrupted sleep, even if your seizures seem to be maintained, you're on meds, you could feel fatigue. You have low tone. If you have low muscle tone, as a rule, it takes you more energy. You may get tired more quickly. So those things are very important. Behavior is what I said, what we see on the outside. So for this young girl that I knew that if she was biting the side of her cheek or biting her lip or biting her finger, that was the beginning of she was anxious. I was testing, as part of being here, I was doing some testing of a young man that I've known since he's 40-ish, and I knew him when he was younger. But he was really trying hard to do the test with me, and then he started breathing, and he started slightly rocking. He was trying so hard, and he couldn't tell me, I want a break. He was trying. He wanted to do his best for me. So I was just let's do 2 more and go get a drink of water. And he was yes, he was happy. But I saw on the outside, and I think I was probably accurate, that was a sign of his anxiety. Collecting data, and then you make your decision. So, we don't want to keep doing something if it's not working. We want to look and say, okay, is this working? Set a reasonable goal, give it some try, and see where it's going. The consequences, as I said before, the C is what happens after the behavior. And what's really important is consequences are not all bad. It's what happens after the behavior. And it does include, and some kids are very sensitive to anything that sounds like corrective, no, you can do better than that. To some children, that's a trigger for them. They want to please, and they hear, no, do it again. That's wrong. Sometimes for some children, that consequence can, in fact, be a trigger. So, like I said, as a teacher, as a therapist, and working in trainings and such, I'm not that easygoing, but I really take into consideration the individual that I'm thinking about, and really think about all the things and what would set them up to succeed. And figuring out reinforcement is really right in the beginning is something that's very important. Everyone is individual. What will motivate this person? Is it attention from you, attention from staff? Is it stickers? Is it tokens? Is it rewards? Is it tickles? Is it bubbles? But for some people, it's escape. That's what's reinforcing them. So we try to turn it around so that the activity should be very positive, so that getting up and getting away from that table isn't the reinforcement. And we don't, we want to create, like I said, I'll come into the environment and I want to be sitting with some toys and activities so that the child or the student wants to come to me. I had a young girl and I didn't know what was happening. I used to have a bag for each kid that I was going to their home visits, and almost all the kids enjoyed me getting to their house, and I enjoyed getting there. So this young girl, she was about 4 at the time, she looks out the window, I knock on the door, she opens the blind, looks, sees me, closes it, and runs away. I was like, whoa, what is this? What am I doing wrong? Well, I took back and I stepped back and I realized that whenever I came into her house, the first thing I did was sit at the kitchen table with her mother. I took her mother's attention, which had been totally hers, and now I was a signal that bad things are happening, Barbara's coming. So what did I do was I decided, she loved Dora at the time, so I had my bag stuffed full of Dora things. I walked in the door and I told the mom ahead, I'm not gonna be talking to you this time. I'm walking in the living room, I'm sitting on the floor with Dora. And boy, did I change it around. But it's taking that, like, step back, take a look, and try to figure out what's happening. And what is that person, I was a signal that bad things were happening. So sometimes we have to really step back and figure this out. The consequences, I said, are not all bad. Because I had a teacher say, this child has to accept the consequences of his behavior. And I'm like, well, consequences are rewards and positive things too, right? I often think about the child's interest as a starting place. So I had a young boy who was fixated on ceiling fans. Now, I don't want him being on ceiling fans for the rest of his life, but developmentally, he was very much at a young level. And you think about young children that love to watch ceiling fans and watch the movement. I knew he didn't have any vision problems because on the weekend, he would go scurrying to get the newspaper to find the smallest of it. I can never even believe there was a ceiling fan in the picture of the Walmart ad that was this small. He would find those fans. So what I had to do is think about how to take that interest and shape it and morph it into something he liked. That he used to, he didn't like haircuts. A lot of the sensory things when you think about haircuts, dentistry, it's all very close in the face, and it's a lot of high-frequency sounds. It's not the most comfortable thing. So what I did was I had this Hess helicopter, and he loved the way the blades worked. So I used that in the barber chair. He would sit in the barber's chair, and I would hold up that Hess helicopter, and he would watch it, and I would distract him. So I used that as a reinforcer for him to sit in the chair. That and a lot more time, took some time, but we got to the other side. Some kids like string, some children like water. How do you take those things and shape them in? So I had a child that didn't like books at all, but loved water. So I found the book Going on a Bear Hunt. And in that story, kind of well into it, there's water. So I had this child know that the water was coming. So we would go through that story, and he gradually, over time, we found books about water. So I paired something he loved with something he didn't like so much, and we got to that. It was very interesting. It was a powerful reinforcer for him, going on a bear hunt. So I asked Mom and Grandma and everybody, I said, please don't buy that book, because it's the one thing I have. I have it in my bag when I come to the house and do therapy. So I'm at his house, his grandmother's house, and he goes, Barbara, you got Going on a Bear Hunt? And I said, no, do you? He said, Granny's closet. He ratted out his grandmother. She had it in her linen closet, so the kids can tell us. But he really liked that, and over time we really did shape up his enjoyment of more than just water or string, power lines. So sometimes we have to think about these things and try to shape them into something more appropriate. Reinforcers are individual. Not everybody likes the same thing. We have to think about the students and our children. I had changed up the slide. I put Beyblades because I haven't seen Beyblades for a while, but one of the guys outside of today, the last few days, has been playing Beyblades. So they've come back. Punishment is something that happens after, and punishment is not, I don't necessarily recommend punishment as a learning tool as much as I need to put it in here. Sometimes people will use time out, but time out does not mean a place. It means if you like attention, I remove my attention. So I've had children that were disrupting their siblings' toys quite a bit. So what I did was there was a timeout for the toys. So the toys were placed in timeout, not the person. So this child liked his toys, but he would take his toys and he would tease his sister with them, and she was just trying to sit in the room. So what we did was we had a red bin, and the toys would go in timeout for 2 minutes. So we didn't have access to the toys he wanted, not that we had to place him somewhere else. Response cost means if you get tokens, then someone takes back that token if you do an inappropriate behavior. Once again, those are techniques that are used sometimes in the schools, but I definitely am much more of a positive reinforcement and really giving more the positive reinforcement rather than the punishment techniques. The antecedents, they talk about the ABCs. Oftentimes we are consequence-based, but I feel that the most important for us to do is really get to these antecedents, set up the person to succeed, all right? So that's, where I feel that then you can practice the correct behavior. If you don't know what is expected of you and you are engaging in these negative behaviors, all I'm doing is telling you stop, no, don't do this, don't do that. That doesn't teach you what to do. So I'll start with some things that I thought are important and, some social skill challenges. So in order to have social skills, you need a lot of different things. And one of the things you need also is the play skills. You need to know how to play the game. So if it's a simple game of tossing a ball back and forth, you need to be able to know what to do with it. So if I give you the ball and you throw it the other direction or throw it behind you or run with the ball, obviously it's not going to be a good social game to play with another child. So in the beginning it might be the teacher and the child, or the parent and the child, or an older sib. But you need to know the skills of the game in order to have play skills with another child. Motivation is one that's very important as well, and it's if the person is not motivated to play with another child, so sometimes children that are younger are more involved with playing, like they call it parallel play. I like to play with my toys, and I don't want you to touch my toys. I want to sit next to you playing those toys. So you have to think about the child's level and their motivation, and then thinking of realistic skills and what's the next step if you're going to try to engage in a more interactive social play. There's some kids and adults have restricted interests. So I only like one thing. I only like Power Rangers. I only like Beyblades. If I only like that one thing, how am I going to have another child unless I have another child that likes the same thing I do? But then we have the challenge of sharing, all right? The pragmatic language. If you don't have the way to talk to another child and communicate that you don't like what they're doing or you want what they're doing, that is, again, another challenge. Speech intelligibility is important because especially when the children are included with other kids, we need our students to be understood by other kids. So that is important as well. Attention span. Someone was mentioning about it, and many of the students with the DUPE have a very short attention span. So you have to come up with a game that's very quick and gradually increase the time that you're going to play at that game. Don't expect to try to have a 20-minute game. Try a 5-minute game, 5-minute break, and a different game, 5 minutes. But gradually increasing that attention span. And social skills really do require some organization skills as well. So in the beginning, it's a lot of times as a teacher in the school, we would have the speech therapist, OT, come into the classroom. So that's when we could try to teach some game skills to play, because we had additional hands and additional staff to kind of model and get that game going, because you might sometimes need a person and you have to practice it so many different times. In terms of social skills, when we want to increase, sometimes we have action figures that can act out. I've had some kids that like to take their Beanie Babies or their dolls or different action figures, and they would act out some play. At schools, we sometimes ask for, it's called a lunch bunch, where you can ask for the school to have the other students be invited to sit at lunch together, and oftentimes, especially in the elementary schools, this can work better. As kids get older, they're less likely to want to be with the teacher at lunch or the therapist, but sometimes speech therapists have done the lunch bunch, was very, very nice, or the OT or the guidance counselor. When you're practicing social skills, it's very important to practice all the roles. So sometimes it's you be the teacher. You be the other, So you teach Miss Barbara. Teach me how to do this game. And sometimes you'll see different skills in the child. I believe in real-time support and feedback. I always say you can't learn to swim on a bench at the YMCA. You need a lot of support. So at schools, and I've been a school administrator, and so at Elwyn, where I worked for 40 years about, my boss's rule was that we were on lunch duty every day, the supervisors, which was great because I got to see the kids. I got to see what they needed. I was able to really see some challenges. When I go into regular ed, sometimes the one-on-one aid for the student that I've seen, they're like, well, the one-on-one aid is off, at lunchtime or recess. I'm like, that's the very time you need the most amount of support during those social interactions with other children. You need more support there and more real feedback to give that person, keep them in the game. If the student starts walking away, engage them, get them back in there. I've used social stories, and how many people have heard about social stories? All right. So the social stories are stories that are written, very individualized, and it's supposed to try to help a person through something that's difficult, but it's written in a positive way, and it's really to give them to understand another person's perspective. So it could be, for example, about at lunchtime, we had a child that didn't understand that he was taking the food from other people's trays. But we're not going in a punitive way. We want the person to enjoy looking at the social story, so we talk about the positive lunchtime, pictures of that child in lunch, having his lunch with his tray, and we really would work through that with him and tell him, people like to eat lunch. We start off very simple. Most of it is very positive, declarative sentences. And then we say, I will try to eat the food on my tray. Because we all need to be able to try things. It doesn't mean that I will not touch other people's food. That's not the way it's written. It's written in a positive way. I will eat the food on my tray. I've found that video modeling is very, very helpful. And so I've had children that were very disruptive, leaving, coming in the door, and then maybe they like to rip down bulletin boards as they walked up to their classroom. So coming off the bus, maybe they came in the door and then they might drop to the ground a little bit, maybe act up a little bit. So what we did was we would video, and we got a good video clip of the person doing the right thing, and we could show it back to the person. Now that makes sense only if the person recognizes themselves in a video, obviously. We have many children that like video, but do they recognize themselves in a picture or in a video? We need to know that before we use this technique. For elementary grades, I often suggest some play dates. And, I have a mom that said, I was never a social mom. I have a daughter, due 15. I never wanted to be this social mom, but I'm having play dates at my house, so other kids will come over. And I can structure it so we had a snack, we had one activity. It was a very brief, that it was somebody from school that showed an interest in the girl, that the school staff said, with your permission and the other mother's permission, they put the moms together to talk, and they came over for just a brief social play date. It had to be just right amount of time, not too long. Things can go south very quickly. We often found we made a list, so every child likes something different. So when we got to the house, it was play blocks, play bubbles, be on the swings. Each person put 2 activities in, and then they could take turns. And that's how we taught, taking turns. Something for everyone. This mom, we talked about social engineering. So she found a child from school, one from dance, one from any church, one from different communities, so that she could sprinkle in other kids, so that she was helping to build her daughter's sphere of friends. We also talk about monitor, don't hover. So as the children are playing a little bit better, I would sit on the steps and work my way upstairs, so I wasn't like hovering over the children, because you really want eventually for them to play with each other. When children are adolescents, sometimes it's bowling lanes or more structured community activities that can be good social skill arenas. One area in Bucks County, they had this it was almost like a coffee shop just for adolescents that were on the spectrum, and it was very structured. The staff that worked there, were very receptive, and a lot of volunteers from the community were there. Volunteer opportunities for some are a great social opportunity. Sometimes working with people in nursing homes has been very helpful, because many people like attention, and some of our guys and girls would give a lot of attention, so the people would enjoy seeing them coming in the door. And as I said, community centers. Communication is one that I think is serious, and I know that Caitlin spoke about AACs a bit. what is really important in this world is that we need to be able to communicate how to protest something, I don't want to do something, and to request. I mean, it's a basic need. And sometimes we're anticipating or trying to figure out what the child wants or doesn't want. So it's very important to put a lot of energy into trying to increase communication. Years ago, it seemed like people were saying, well, don't try alternative communication systems until the child is older or has more skills. You really need to figure out what the person really does best with. Not everybody. I had a boy that was deaf, and he did not want to use sign language. He wanted to use a picture exchange communication system, and everybody's like, wow, he's deaf. You know, we have a teacher of the deaf here at Elwyn. We can have, he was like, no, he didn't want that. The other children were using more the picture exchange. Well, that's what he wanted to use. So when he was younger, that's what we used. So we need to figure out, communication can be verbal, the way I'm talking to you. It can be gestural, and it doesn't have to be perfect sign. But there is, actual sign language. The picture exchange, which isn't just pointing to pictures on a board, it's actually using a picture to make a communicative intent, or those assistive technology devices, the Mac switches. How many people have kids that use AAC or picture exchange? Anybody? How about any iPads? Okay. And gestures, sign language? So a couple of, okay. So I think there's just all these different techniques, but it's also trying to figure out which is the best fit. And just using an iPad isn't always the best, because it may be that some kids, the iPad might be great, but the program is not suited to the child. There's a mom here that I know, and she was very frustrated because there was an iPad that her child had assigned, dedicated to him. They went on 3 field trips, and she said there is not a picture of McDonald's in here, the playground they went to. The things that he was accessing, that iPad was supposed to be his communicative device, but the school wasn't programming the actual things that he was doing in his environment. So that is really important. Sometimes the field is too big. There's like a 30 by 30. That's way too many. Can the person recognize those pictures? So does the person have a good point? Can they actually take their finger and make enough of a point? And I've noticed that sometimes too, if there's uncertainty, do you ever see that the person like goes to point but doesn't go completely to the picture? I had a young girl that she would not, I was using more pictures like in front of her on a table, and I would say, give me this, show me that, whatever. She would never touch broccoli. And I knew she knew broccoli, all right? She was afraid that if she touched broccoli, I was giving her broccoli. So you gotta be careful, right? Sometimes too, the pictures, the icons from that, the PECs are used for communication boards, for behavior boards, so I had a child that like took me off their schedule because they thought they could make the selection. I'm done with Barbara, she's off my list. There's some things that are choice boards and some things that are behavior. So I always say, make sure, if I'm an outsider and I come in that room and I can't figure out that board, then that child in the classroom probably can't figure it out either, right? And making sure that nowadays there's actual photographs. So for some kids, that actual photograph is even better. But as we will also see ways that some people will use the actual objects. So it's all those different ways. But functional communication training is very important. I also think about prevent, teach, reinforce. If I see and I know that I can hear there's escalation, behaviors are starting, then if I want to try to interrupt it, engage the person in something I know would be appropriate, and reinforce the appropriate behavior. So I'm spending more time practicing what I want to see. There's just so many hours in the day. Kids have so many things to learn. So I feel that it's very important to, if you can, it's like prevent, teach what you want, reinforce what you want. And then over time, you can increase the time on task and different things. Practice and rehearsing, I said sometimes. So with toilet training, I had sometimes as an in-home therapist, so I had this little boy that and he was nonverbal when I worked with him. He was not toileting. He threw up in the barber chair because he hated haircuts so much. He was my Hess haircut helicopter boy. Well, I was telling the school he's toilet trained. right? And I'm an outsider coming in, and they're looking at me, they're like, yeah, you're like the parent, right? I'm like the mom now because I'm from the home. And I'm like, he is toilet trained. He has not had an accident for weeks and weeks at home. So I walk in the school, he looks at me, he goes, Barbara, do you have to go potty? And I said, no, do you? And he said, uh-huh. So what happened was we taught him to be toilet trained, but he didn't generalize it to other people. All right? He didn't know to ask anybody outside of his own home. And those simple things are so big. So we have to think about that. I know that when we're hearing about the Jasper program and such, and I always think that some kids have to learn how to access information first. So sometimes we're not as ready to learn things. Like we're not ready for table time. We need to learn how to listen to the speaker. So in a classroom, if we have lots of aides, and some of the classrooms I go into have more adults than children, it is phenomenal. It's so distracting to me, right? Because you might have so many adults, the kid, who do they listen to, right? So what we have to do is if we want a child to look at the teacher, then we have to reinforce that looking to the teacher. Hi, someone's waving to me from the back. So it's very important to practice this communication skill. Okay, so there's different types of AAC, and if you heard next door, I don't want to repeat, but basically there's unaided communication, so that's facial expression, that's noises, the way we make noises. I can communicate. I can know a lot of the students I've worked with. I can tell you when they're not happy, when they're happy. There might be a sound. There are gestures, and there's actual sign language, but those are unaided. The person does that without the aid of someone else. The aided devices are more what the Mac switches, some of these keyboards, and there's many, many types. Then there's the low tech, which are your paper pencil, like the pictures in a book or a picture exchange, the single message voice output. So we went to a school where this young girl was getting up and running out the door every few minutes, and it was that she wanted to leave the room. And she had a very short attention span. She was nonverbal. So we decided we needed to have her have a way to say, go walk, all right? Because she wanted to walk. So we programmed this switch, this red switch, to say walk. So we let her in the beginning, and it took lots and lots of time, but she learned to hit that and say walk, and then we let her go for a walk. Over time, then we had to hide that switch because every 2 minutes she was hitting the switch, go walk, go walk, go walk. So we had to make it unavailable at times. But the kids teach us, right? I mean, our behavior is shaped by the children as much as we can work on shaping theirs up. The fixed screen, so some of these screens have some voice output, and you can actually, if you have a child that has some single word vocabulary, you can program it for their vocabulary, their voice, or you can pick a female, male voice. And it's gotten much more, it's very improved today compared to the way it was when technology first hit. Then there's also these dynamic displays, which are much more like a very dynamic, but in the beginning, you really need to know the right program, as I said, for your child. And you might use different, you're not going to necessarily take a $2,000 piece of equipment in the bathtub or on the playground. So sometimes you need to use a sign language or a different form of communication depending on the setting. Transition is a really difficult challenge for many, many children and adolescents and adults. When I really step back and try to think of what is transition, and I think there's a transition from place to place, right? So if we go from here next door, that's a transition. There's transition from activity to activity. So I'm doing puzzles, and next thing I'm going to do bubbles, or I'm having lunch, the next thing I'm going to do is go to a meeting. Then there's a person to person. So in the schools, there's people. I go to an IEP meeting, and it's like I think about it, there's like 10 people around the room, and I think the only person in this room that knows all these people are your child. Okay, I didn't know all these people. There's therapists, there's a school nurses, all these people that may be in your child's life in a day. So but then they may have to listen to different people in the school environment. So they have to transition from person to person. Then there's preferred to non-preferred, which can go any which way. I can go from something I like doing to something I don't like doing. I can go from being with a person I like to a person I don't like to be with. So all of these things are transition. And I've had children that even when I love my family, I love school, coming to school, getting off the bus, going into that building is a big transition. And is it anxiety because each time I'm not sure what I'm expecting? There's a lot of reasons why transitions are difficult. So I said that you can be preferred and non-preferred. It's all those different variations. So then I started really thinking about what helps us. So what helps you and I is like a mental schedule. We understand time better. So if I know this morning at 8 o'clock I'm not speaking till 2:45, I have an idea in my mind how much time that is. But if I'm a child, with 2:15, I may not understand that time. Okay, so visual schedules will help to ground people, and I find that, as I said, it can be the actual items, it can be pictures, photos along with printed words, and I always try to grow my students up. So if I'm using one thing, will not always stay at the object level. I will start trying to move them up, but I want to make sure they actually know what these pictures look like, because it makes no sense for me to go to a school and see a schedule on the wall and the child's not using it, or it's in front of them and they're not using it. It's not being helpful then. Sometimes, and one of the best techniques I've seen used is creating a job. So if a person has anxiety and doesn't like to come into the school, but they love to go to the office because there's a person in that office that they really like. So what I'll sometimes do is create a job that they have to come to the office and bring something to the office, then they pick something up at the office and then bring it to their school. But I've had children that didn't like fire drills because of the noise when we had to do them, mandatory in schools, you need to evacuate if you hear a fire bell. So we had a student that really got very, very upset and anxious and crying and falling to the ground whenever he would hear that fire bell. We gave him the job. He was the helper. He took attendance. Now, he couldn't read the attendance slips, but he had a clipboard just like the teacher, and he would go outside, and all the classes would be in line, and he would take a paper from each teacher. That helped him through a very difficult time. Doing mail, doing delivery, attendance. I had one boy that he shaped up. He wanted his grandmother's attention. So grandma was the one greeting him from the bus. Well, in the beginning, the school bus, and it was a bus with 3 children, would be at the end of the driveway, which was like two car lengths, and the driver would beep, and grandma would wave, and he would walk to the house, right? He just figured out that he could get grandma to he was trying to get grandma to come to get him from the bus. So he was shaping it up that then he was having the bus drive up the driveway. And it was like, this is getting nuts, right? We got to do something here. So what we said was, what do you do, grandma, when he gets in the door? Well, he always has a cup of cocoa and cookies. So we said, all right. So in the morning, we snuck the bus driver his pack of hot cocoa. And when they pulled up at house, Grandma was at the door with a mug and the cookies right in the face, and the bus driver would say, here's your cocoa, and guess what? He walked right up, gave it to Grandma, and did it. But it takes a lot of front loading, a lot of energy to think of things, and I think that that's really important. The vantage point I have is being from a second set of eyes, because I'm watching a whole classroom, potentially. I can see all the dynamics, but I also say, as a behavior specialist, put the camcorder. When I'm a mom in my own house with my own children, it's not so easy. And I always think of the children, because children are going to respond differently to the parent as they will to a therapist. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes a child might, in the beginning, because I'm not a parent, for this little guy that wouldn't get haircuts in the beginning, he was so anxious, and Mom got so anxious in the barber shop that it was easier if I was there with him in the beginning, because I was neutral. And and eventually, over many, many months, we went to the barber shop ahead of time. I took pictures in the barber shop. We figured out that every time he was there, some other kid was getting the buzzers. And he would freak from the sound of those buzzers. So we said, can we come visit and just see your barbershop when it's quiet? And we did that with dentistry, we did that with haircuts, and over time, but it took a lot of work, but it worked eventually. Sometimes those preferred items or fidget toys are distractors, but sometimes they're distractors to get the person moving along, but if they become more distracting to the person, then that's not a good thing. Sometimes, people have fidget toys in the classroom. What I've done with some kids like the touch of Velcro. So I've put it under the desk, either the scratchy side or the smooth side, whichever the child liked. So they were getting that sensory, but it was not disruptive to the class, nor were they, taking it and walking around the room with it. Nonverbal cues are very effective, especially if in the beginning. It also reinforces looking and some eye contact. So very basic signs, sometimes stop, go. They look very much like an action. And some children that really learn that if they might want something and I might say stop or I say no, then I could point to their schedule. I don't have to constantly be talking because it's harder to remove a constant verbal reminder rather than some nonverbal ones are easier to get rid of the cues. Pre-specified reinforcers, so sometimes right in front of the person, they will see what they're working with for. Or a child might say, I want to play with bubbles. So I put the thing of bubbles right there, and we're playing, and we know bubbles are coming. It's just like you or I knowing that I'm going to go for a coffee break. But I know that schedule in my mind. Today, I must have looked at this schedule at least 4 or 5 times. I knew it was 2:45. I've been looking at this schedule for weeks. But when you're anxious or thinking about things, you're not as, you're like anxious, so you're like, what time am I speaking? It's 2:45. What room am I in? The things that we do as adults are the things that I came over here and looked at the room ahead of time. Before a school year, what do we want to do? Go to the school ahead of time, see what that school looks like. So changing from school to school. I had children that were changing from elementary to middle school. So what we did was we went to the middle school and took pictures of each of the different people in the middle school. The person would know that this is the school nurse from my elementary school, so I used a split screen photo, showed nurse, nurse, teacher, teacher, your room, gym. The kid was so happy to know there was a playground at the next school, right? And it was just so easy to do. But those transitions, if you rehearse it, you give some visual strategy to it, and visual schedules are very effective. The 2-minute warning, I've had people that really don't have a concept of 2 minutes, but understand things are going to change. So that verbalization, 2-minute warning means, oh, things are going to change. Some of the schedules are like I was talking about some of the object schedules. So I had a child that, we actually had a piece of the sneaker meant we were going to gym. We had a bowl. We had the container from wipes, so we knew that that's when he wanted to go get changed. In the beginning, he had these objects, and he would know that that was his schedule. And sometimes it's drawings. It depends on the child and where they're going. Then when children are older, we often try to grow them up, so I might use something more like from Staples or like a standard type of a schedule. So this was color-coded for different activities of the day. Sometimes we see that children have problems when they transition from elementary school to the higher grades, and I think about the classroom and the structure. When we talk about the environment sets the stage for us. So if you think about an elementary classroom, everything is pretty much, what it's expected. This is a carpet. This is where we have our story time. This is kitchen. This is where we play. This is the book area. When you get to upper grades, the rooms become very open-ended. So it's not as easy to know what you're going to be doing in different areas of the room. Physical or verbal aggression, if you understand the triggers that right after this sound or a demand is placed, so then I have to step back and think, is the demand too difficult? Is it the way I'm saying it? Do I need to give the person more warning that this is what's coming next? If I can hear and know that there is going to be I had one boy that would say, you're fired. So right after I was fired, he would take his desk and kind of toss some items off of it. It was like he was done. So what I was like, as soon as I heard I was fired, I had to be quick on my feet and think about something that I could distract him with. So I knew he liked to go to Walmart. So I would say to my colleague in the office, I would say, do you think Walmart's open now? And he just said, I'm fired. And he looked over, he's like, Walmart's open. And he would be forgetting that he was saying I was fired. And then I would just say, do you think that they have some bubbles there? I'm out of bubbles in the classroom. Get the person off of their game and engage them into something appropriate. Sometimes it's the people in the room. Sometimes there's too much disruption. Sometimes we have to move and remove the audience. Sometimes the other children the noises of another child could be a trigger for some of the students that I've worked with. very important is often to be neutral, no nonsense when correcting. So if you need to correct someone that they've been hitting, I try to say, you know, hands are for clapping, let's clap hands. The person is smacking and swatting at me. I might say, you know, I might do, give me 5. Try to redirect that physicality and put it into, shape it into something appropriate. Not giving a lot of eye contact when disciplining, and I don't like that. If you're looking at the person, you're giving so much attention to that behavior that sometimes what is happening is it's reinforcing it because the child liked your attention. I went to one school, and the young girl was about 12 or 14, and she never met me. I walked in the room, and she looks and she goes, "Sit here in case I curse." So obviously she knew she was cursing in class, right? And it was like, I was like, oh, this is too much. She's been getting way too much attention for cursing, right? So I did not even talk about cursing with her at all. But we you know, I engaged her in stories. We did lots of activities with her, and we talked about the fact that there's too many people were saying no curse. Mommy doesn't like it when you curse. Daddy doesn't curse. It was all this talking, curse, curse, curse. I didn't even know how many words she had in her vocab, but her cursing was the most clear artic, which is not the best that was coming out of there. So neutral, no nonsense, and oftentimes if a child is aggressive, what I'll try to do is I don't give a lot of eye contact. I'm protecting the child. I'm protecting maybe other children. I'm trying not to be triggering them further. Not as much hands-on, but kind of protecting and not giving a lot of eye contact and not talking about what's happening, right? I'm not going to say stop kicking, don't hit, don't. I might be just saying, you know, whatever I know that this child understands. I might use some vocabulary. We're going to have quiet time in a few minutes. We're going to have reminding them that something good is happening in a few minutes. All right? Preferred adult or staff could put the demand on during those difficult tasks. I said one male teacher out of 12 teachers, and Mr. Tim was like, everybody was like, Mr. Tim, I can get him to do everything. This kid does everything for me. Well, he was the novelty. He was the male in this whole female school, right? And it was so funny, but Mr. Tim was very helpful during fire drills for when we had to do some, you know, difficult, or we went to assemblies, which could be difficult for some kids. There's too many people in the room. He would get to sit with Mr. Tim. And that was the motivator for him to sit quietly because Mr. Tim was such a powerful reinforcer. Moving within buildings, a lot of those strategies are similar to the transition strategies that we talked about. One I got from a classroom assistant, which was great. Every time I go, I learn from other people and teachers and parents. I learn activities and ideas. This person really loved the staff person, but tended to be the kid that's always ahead, running ahead of the group. So the instructional assistant would talk about something the child liked, which was her pets, in a quieter voice, so the person stayed naturally next to her. So it was a very natural, normal thing to do to say, I heard your little puppy was naughty last night, and she would talk really low, so the little girl would stay beside her because she wanted to engage with her. So she stayed with her instead of running down that hall. She also was the one girl that liked to rip all the bulletin boards, so we videoed her walking and doing the right thing, and we showed it to her, and she could recognize herself in a video. And she looked, because we edited out anything that she did that was kind of off camera that we wanted her not to see. She looked at us like, where did it go when I was like throwing myself to the ground? Where did it go when I ripped that bulletin board? We said, look, this is the way you walk. This is a way a big girl walks from the bus to your room. Show her what it looks like. Practiced it, and she really, she got it. She really enjoyed it. These social stories can then become mantras. So sometimes kids, have a difficulty with change, or we just like go with the flow. So what we would do is do the social story about being flexible, and it depends on the vocabulary of the child. So flexible. So what I did was I had rubber bands, I had a hose, I had things that were flexible. And what we talked about was, or go with the flow. So then what I would say, they're like, is Miss Barbara absent? Is Miss Sue absent? They were, the child was upset, somebody was absent, the teacher, there was a substitute. They would look at me and they'd go with the flow. And it was that we did it in a quiet moment. We didn't do it in the heat of the moment that we sat down and said, let's write a social story. We thought, oh, this is a tough thing for this child when there's a substitute, or their favorite teacher's not there, or when dad goes on a trip. The child has a real hard time at home. So let's do this while in the, we don't want to, we want to strike when the iron's cold, so to speak, not when it's hot. You don't try to teach a child to eat when they're ravenous. You let them have a little food. They need to be hungry, but the manners are going to be better if they're a little hungry, not like they just need the food immediately. So those mantras can help. Following directions and requests, those visual supports are really important. Practicing with positive requests, and I had one child that said, Miss Barbara always tells me things. And I was like, it was because I pretty much put a lot of directives on her, right? I was like, sit, come bring this to me, get your backpack. I was not saying, oh, let's have cookies, come here, let's play. So I had to really turn it around and say, I need to be associated. I talk about pairing yourself with reinforcer. I need to be this reinforcer to the person. I'd like to go to a school, and a lot of children that don't want to engage with an adult because maybe they're expecting the adult's going to put some demands. So I would come in, bring the activities, put them on the table, and start playing with them. And the child was like the shark circling the table. They saw what I had. I knew that they liked what I had, and eventually they came to me rather than me going, come sit with me, right? So sometimes we need to practice these things with positive and really make ourselves that positive. Allowing for a delay. Sometimes kids say no first. I have a group of kids that it seemed like they always say no first, and maybe they didn't understand what I was saying. It maybe wasn't that they won't do it, they just didn't understand the directions. Those nonverbal reminders can be very helpful. Asking a lot of people, there's a lot of things that you have always with you, is can you help me? And some kids really like to help. Can you give me this? That can be ways that you can get a person to follow directions in the beginning. That one, and reinforcing following directions. So when a person does what they're supposed to do, like you said, go get your backpack, and the child got it. Yay, thank you so much, you got the backpack, great job. Instead of just, oh, great, business as usual. We forget that. It's just like when people sometimes take away they decrease the reinforcement of the positive too quickly. Humor, some kids have a really good sense of humor, and this one girl hated cleaning up, and it was like, oh, clean up your palace, princess. And she would laugh at me and clean up. So it depends on the child. Like I said, I went to some school to see a young girl who was very behavior disordered, and she was disrobing and running out the door. And I was about to do a presentation about this another syndrome, and I push play, and I get a phone call rings, and it's the superintendent who was down in the classroom, and he said, stop the presentation, come downstairs. This girl is running away. I want you to stop her. Show me, put me on. I was like, I don't have anything in my savings account. I don't know this child. No two kids are cookie cutters of each other. I have to have something in my savings account with that child. I have to have some knowledge of that person, what they like, so that I have things to work with. So humor for some kids can work, but it's something that we have together that we've grown over time. I need to know what your child likes to be reinforcing for that child. High probability, so if you know a child you have a Beanie Baby, they like to kiss the Beanie Baby, they like to do clap hands, several things they like to do, then I might do those 2-3 things first, because I've gotten the child in the motion. If they're doing it, and then I say, and now get me your backpack. Or now, let's go to the bathroom. Let's go potty. It's time to go potty. I've got you doing yes, 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 and then sometimes it's like the action precedes the motivation. I got you in that motion of going to where we were going, the high probability. This was feed the class pet and then get out your folder. So schedules, this is a schedule showing the order of doing things. We have task completion. And you oftentimes have the ability to, what do you want to do first? That is always available. We can always offer that to children. First, what do you want to do first? Put in the forefront what you want the child. So the child says, I want my cookies, I want my dessert, I want computer, I want this. Yes, you're going to get it. It's coming. Don't say not now, because what we often will say, you can't have your dessert until after you eat your dinner. We've done a lot of talking, and all the person heard was no. And they reacted. They're down on the ground, they're crying because they heard no. Instead of saying, yes, we have cookies, but we're getting them after dinner. So you're putting in the forefront what you want the person to hear, and so that the reaction's not so sudden. Sometimes I've seen our students have, with the 15, who are very sudden 0 to 60 response. And sometimes I think that, we're seeing a lot of very reactive to things. So very often we might need to know that this is going to happen, so what can we do is to give them the positive that's coming. Schedules are very helpful. Timers can be good for some people and not good for others. Adult attention, sometimes it's the proximity of the adult. Just that person being next to that person. I notice with a lot of our girls and guys that they really like a lot of physical, many like proximity and touch and closeness, sometimes a little bit too much. The mother's like, could you give me a break here? You're on top of me, giving me so much love, right? But that proximity can be very valuable in the classroom if you have an instructional assistant to be beside the person, collaboration, doing things together, the preferred adult, and reinforcing that something's finished. And so in the beginning, too, I think with people that have short attention, we tend to respond to that quick attention, and we move on quicker, too. Instead, just like when I play games with a child, like they want to just do one thing, like move one man, they're in charge. They only want to play when they're the one that's moving the man. And I'm like, we'll do 2 more. And I make it quick. It's just like 2 minutes can be an hour for a child with a short attention span. But if I get up every time the child gets up, then I'm reinforcing that short attention span too. But it takes work and time. Timers, like I said, I've had some that have not been as positive as others. Some of them are nonverbal, they're not auditory, so you can see time lapsing. Nowadays, a lot of people are using the timers on the iPads. The one thing I think that's really important that I came to realize is that most often, timers are used to say, when the timer goes off, it's time to put away the iPad. So timers signal that something's going to be lost. It's rare that we say, when the timer goes off, it's time for cookies. When the timer goes off, it's time. And even though that's in the kitchen, that's what usually means when the timer goes off, the food's ready. So what I've been trying to do is mix it up with kids so that they don't have an aversion to timers. Because that timer, when the timer goes off, we're going outside. So that signal of a timer is not always negative. What can I do differently to help with children? I often talk about communicating effectively. My voice and tone is really important. So if I'm talking very quickly, sometimes I may seem anxious, or like I might seem more stern. When I've had a bad sore throat, sometimes kids look at you like scared, like your voice doesn't sound right? Speaking, I never speak below a child's level, but speaking at the right level is so important. Talking about things the person likes, how important is that? If you only have a few things you like, could I learn what you like and talk to you about them? I said when my son was little, I could not see those Pokemon games, but I learned the characters, right? It wasn't age, it was my eyes. I could not see those little guys, but I learned all the characters, right? So engaging the person in what they like, and then trying to, talking about preferred activities. Those are things that you have with you when a person's having a difficult time. Having reinforcers available, so sometimes the Home Depot, those little pockets, like I had one mom that I said we put McStuffins in one pocket. She put her boy, she had like lots of things that he liked. He liked carrot sticks, so she had like, a couple of different things, some little edibles, but having those things available so she could get him distracted when she was at a store and he didn't want to leave. She would be like, oh, what's in my pocket? And it was Doc McStuffins, a little character that he hadn't seen. There's different ways to have those reinforcers available for you, and keeping them powerful. Minimizing those known triggers, and using some visual supports. So in the car, even a dollar wipe-off board. Some kids that can't read somehow understand that time is going through, that they're seeing that they're finishing things. So sometimes using like a board. I'm not a very good artist, but I can draw a swing. I can draw a cookie. I can draw a few things, and the child could see, after this, we're going outside. I do a picture of a book. Next, we're going outside. So I made that. The challenges for parents or staff working with children are often those behaviors that are automatically reinforced, so and I don't know, did anyone listen to the speaker about stereotypical behaviors? I know that's going to be taped as well. But kids that do rocking or call it self-stim behaviors, the person's getting something for it that's under their own control, they're automatically reinforced, or kids that might make noises or grind their teeth. Sometimes some of those things they're things that the person's getting some reinforcement for. That is not something that we're doing or giving to the person. So those are difficult if the person, we have some students that have, engage in self-injury, and, they may hurt themselves, but for that child, we have some children that would pick at skin or do things that might be we might think they may be hurting themselves, but maybe they're getting rid of an uncomfortable feeling, but they're in control of that. So those are the more difficult behaviors to address. Difficulty is also for children that don't learn as much from those consequences, so we have to repeat and practice those things until the person really understands it better and be more consistent, and it's really hard to be consistent. And distancing things. So if a child, and like, if a child's having, crying suddenly at lunch today, I was with a family and the little girls, because the cookie was not as available, a piece of fruit was given to her as an alternate, like she was eating too many cookies. And she was like, crying, pulling, grabbing, getting all it. And it was really great because I was telling the mom, she waited a few minutes and then got a cookie. First let the girl finish her grape. Then when she was quieter, she gave her a piece of the cookie, all right? But if she had given her that cookie right away, that would have reinforced that. So the distance between the behavior that you don't like if it's crying and screaming, being cautious not to give too much attention to that, but really finding something quick that you can reinforce. Finding appropriate reinforcers. So if a child likes string and water and fans, or likes ripping paper. I have one boy that really likes to crinkle paper. How do we shape that up? And that's some challenges that we take. I will create a PDF of this for you, and I will give it to Vanessa so she can share these with you. And I'll just finish this last 1 or 2 slides, but I'll be here. And if you have questions that you'd like to ask me specifically, I would gladly take those questions. Effective strategies, clear, effective communication, structure, routine, consistency. Attention to these signals that things are, anxiety and those triggers I think are so important. Understand that a person can use some words but sometimes don't really understand as much of what we are saying. So being cautious that a person can talk, but do they understand what we're asking of them? Too much verbal information sometimes. If somebody says, oh, kids respond so much better to men than women. Well, women have higher pitched voices. We tend to talk more. So, sometimes it's talking less. And really getting to that point. I tried with one guy, I was like, put your book bag away. I tried to do the deep voice, it didn't work. He knew it was me. Redirection, distraction are really effective. So if you have a person that's easily distracted and distractible, use it as a tool for you when you need to. Getting that person off their dime, practicing the right behavior, engage them into something positive, practicing, and the more times a day that you're practicing the appropriate behavior, the better it's going to continue. I feel that schedules and visual supports are often essential. Sometimes you get to high school and adults. I have a young adult that I saw recently, and the mom's like, do you think I need to bring out a visual schedule again? I'm like, yes. He doesn't still understand time enough that he doesn't understand what's expected of the day. And how many of us use our day timers, our planners? How many people call their home message and let them have messages? We use a lot of things to give ourselves reminders of our schedules. So what's to say this isn't helpful for the child and the student? Structuring the environment so the person can succeed. When possible, offer choices, just 2, not being like at the Panera when the people are standing there like there's 12 things to choose from. 2 is enough. A choice is a nice thing. Sometimes it feels good to be offered a choice. Teach and offer the opportunity to request a break, very important, because if I see a child starting to kick or throw themselves to the ground, I'm like, oh, do you need a break? Well, guess what? I've now kind of reinforced that kicking and laying on that floor. I needed to be in there a few minutes before that behavior and taught them, would you like to go get a drink of water? Like teaching that, and then did you need a break later? Like I got him before he started being on the floor. Don't underestimate the value of calm. Control what you can, which is the environment and your responses. And that's what I always think. When behavior is out of control and things seem so much going on, I look in the mirror and try to figure out how can I change things. What am I doing? Sometimes it's my demands that are not appropriate. Maybe I'm not the right my demands are not the right match for the child. What can I do differently? These are some resources for you for creating social stories and charts and stickers and all kinds of different interventions that you might want. All right. So thank you very much. Did I do well on my time? All right. What time is it? 4:01. It's 4:01. Okay. Thank you.